All right. Good morning again. My name is Magdi Hanna. I am the CEO of the International Institute for Software Testing, as well as the CEO and the Chief Architect of Romana Software. Thank you for joining me this morning or this afternoon in this 1-hour webinar to share with you my experience with what I call feature-based or requirement-based project management. This webinar is put for you as presented to you by Romana Software, which is the company that has the integrated application lifecycle manager, Romana, and also by the International Institute for Software Testing. Both organizations are sponsoring the international conference on software quality and test management, which is going to be held in September in San Diego, September 29th through October 3rd. Let me start briefly by talking about why requirements are so important. I don't know if I need to convince you that requirements are important. Just want to tell you that in any software project, in any project at all that is supposed to deliver something to the customer, you can imagine what we are delivering to the customer is what's important in any project. It doesn't matter what anything else, how do we do anything else. It doesn't matter how we perform our tasks. It doesn't matter who's doing it. Really what matters the most to our customers is that what they're getting, the features, the requirements, the deliverables. And of course, associated with that, the quality of those features and when those features are going to be delivered. So as a result, it wouldn't make much sense to manage our projects focusing on anything else other than those deliverables. If you are on LinkedIn, I have posted a discussion on a number of groups there, I think agile groups, project management groups, and the discussion was saying requirement-based or feature-based versus task-oriented project management. That discussion generated a lot of back and forth discussion on these groups. If you are a member of any one of those groups, go ahead and look at the discussions, look at the reactions of people, because it kind of strikes me that for so many years we've been using tools like Microsoft Project, and if you've used the Microsoft Project, you know that a tool like that forces you to manage your project in terms of tasks. The focus is on tasks, not on anything else. And along the tasks, they focus on the resources, the timelines, and so on. There is no place for a tool like Microsoft Project to put your features there and your requirements. Of course, simply because it is not a requirement management tool. It is mainly a project management tool. But yeah, I guess at the time, Microsoft Project was architected. No one really felt how important requirements are. That's why. But here is simply why I strongly believe that requirements are so critical. As I said, requirements are what your customers care about. They are what they're expecting to get at a specific time. When you talk about how much time it takes to deliver something, you're talking about how much time it takes to design, to code, to test those features. Okay. When you talk about budget, it is the requirements or the features that cost money, nothing else. And they cost money because designing and decoding and testing them and delivering them costs money and take time. Okay. When we speak about risks, and I'm talking specifically about project level risks or project risks, many of those risks are associated with specific deliverables. So when we are talking about a risk that comes in our project that we expect that we have some idea that it might actually realize and it cause a problem, it is always useful to link this back to the requirements and to see how which deliverable or which requirement or which feature will be impacted by that risk. Because again, one more time, it doesn't help the customer or the project manager or the release manager to speak about risk without knowing how that risk impacts the deliverable. All right? Requirements changes over time. When requirements changes, they impact other changes, and the requirement, the impact also the project timeline. If you look at this chart here you have in front of you, okay, you see that I put requirements in the center of the circle, and around it there are many things, and I have not even included everything. So simply in that chart, all what I'm saying here, if we are going to speak about tasks that we are going to perform, then we need to speak about performing those tasks for certain requirements. So it doesn't make any sense to speak about design or code or testing without relating those tasks to a specific requirement, because designing one requirement is different from designing another requirement. Designing one requirement might take a day, designing another requirement might take 3 days. Testing one feature might take 2 hours, testing another feature might take 4 hours. So we don't have a task called testing, but rather we have a task called testing that we associate with specific features. The same is true, as you know, we cannot speak about just tests. Every requirement or every feature or every user story has tests. Now, I'm glad I mentioned the user stories, because once I start to talk about requirements or features, those of us who work with agile projects may say, well, we don't use requirements, we use user stories. The discussion still applies. So a requirement here that you see in the center of the circle is either an actual requirement or what you call a feature, you call a function, you call it a user story. It's whatever we are delivering to the customer at the end of the release or at the end of the sprint in an agile project. All right? If you're talking about issues or bug reports down here, or I should say up here, then you need to always relate or trace issues back to the requirements. Most importantly, if you're talking about progress, how far are we? It wouldn't make sense to just talk about how far are we in the project, but you speak about how far are we with respect to every deliverable, every requirement. If you're talking about schedule, which is when we are going to do and complete certain things. Again, one more time. It doesn't make any sense to talk about schedule in terms of tasks. You can't say we're going to start our testing from that date to that date, because we don't test everything at once. We can start testing a given feature from this date to that date, but we can start testing another feature at a totally different time period. You will see what all that means when you look at the reports and the structures I'm going to show you. So what does it mean to manage your projects with requirements in mind? These next 2 slides summarize what I just said here. You want to be able to allocate and manage project resources. Project resources are the people who are doing things, and their roles and responsibilities for each one of the requirements. So you want to be able to speak about who is doing the prototyping for this feature, and who is doing the testing for that feature, and who's doing the design, and who's doing the code. Okay? You want to be able to create and manage project tasks, and when I say project tasks, are things like, again, designing, prototyping, coding, testing, whatever. You want to be able to manage those, create those, and manage those with respect to every specific requirement. Okay? Now, having said that, right away you would say, but there are tasks that you cannot link back to requirements. There are tasks like, for example, creating the final build. When you say creating the final build or doing regression testing, these are examples of tasks that are not linked to a specific requirement, and that's fine. We're going to keep those. We're going to call them project level tasks. So while managing our projects, we're going to have requirement level tasks, and those are the tasks that you can link back to specific requirements, and we're going to have project level tasks. And we do not want to forget either. When we do our time estimates, we're going to estimate how much is going to take, how much time is going to take to design, to code, to test every specific requirement. But also we're going to estimate how much time is going to take to perform each one of the other project level tasks. Okay, and your total estimates of the project is going to have the total of all the requirements and all the estimates from all the features plus all the other estimates. All right. When we manage projects, we're all familiar with the concept of action item lists, and we create those sometimes. We create those because they are essential in managing a project. Well, guess what? If you look at those actions in an action item list, you're gonna find that some of those actions apply to certain requirements. Some of them apply to other requirements, and again, one more time, some of them do not apply to any requirements because they are what I call project level actions. And they will remain as such. As I said earlier, excuse me, when you talk about risks, what if someone says there is a risk here that the license for our testing tool, for say the license for the tool that we're using for load or performance testing has expired, and we need to renew that. There is a risk that we may not be able to renew the license because probably renewing the license will require some budget that we don't have. So, well, taking that risk by itself, I need to go back and say, does this affect a specific requirement? If it does, it might affect a requirement that has to do with performance and load testing. Hopefully, I have a requirement in my project that speaks to load and performance. Otherwise, what am I doing? Because some people say, well, it affects load and performance testing. I say load and performance testing is a task that we are going to perform because supposedly we had a requirement, even the requirement was not explicitly stated by the customer, but it is implicitly expected by the customer. So we have this requirement about load and performance, and that risk about license being expired has to do or will impact that deliverable. And yes, you need to go back to the release manager, to the project manager, to the whoever, or to the customer and say, we may not be able to do load and performance testing as we planned, which means we're going to put out the release or the sprint without performance testing being performed. But as I said again, there will be risks that are project level risks. And those remain as such. And you say this is general project level risk that does not apply and does not impact any specific requirement, but it impacts the whole project. All right? The timeline, as you're going to see it in this presentation, has to do with every single requirement. As I said, it doesn't make any sense to say, when are we going to start the testing? When are we going to start the prototyping? When are we going to start coding? When are we going to start designing? You would do this for every specific requirement. The cost and time estimates must be performed for each requirement. Based on what? Based on the specific tasks we perform on that requirement. As I said, plus all the other estimates that are for project level tasks. If you speak about scenarios, and you know, I hope some of you have attended my webinar on scenario-based development and testing. Scenarios and test cases, those are related to requirements. I don't just develop code for scenarios. I don't just write test cases for scenarios. I speak about test cases for specific scenarios that have to do with a specific requirement or a specific user story. So I have to link my tests, my test cases, my scenarios back to the specific user story or requirement or function or feature, whatever you want to call it. All right, there's so much to do, so let me get into the next slide here. I'm gonna call this the minimal practice. This is what I expect any project at all to be doing. And that's simply knowing what are the tasks we have in our project. Okay, and how many hours did we estimate for this task to take? And so at least you have that, but then in addition, you'd have the actual hours, how many hours actually it took us actually to perform the task. And if you're doing this in Excel spreadsheet, you should be able to calculate something that I call the percentage of deviation, which tells you if you overestimated or underestimated. That's very critical. If you hire a contractor to work in your backyard, guess what? They do that. They know what you want. They know your deliverables. They know what they have to complete for you. They break this down into certain tasks they need to perform, because when they break it into tasks, they need to estimate how many hours, because they want to make sure that if they can do this by themselves or they have to bring more labor, more people to work. So they have an estimate of the number of hours it's going to take to perform each one of the things they're going to do. And I bet at the end of a project, they will have an idea about have they taken the same amount of time they estimated or not. Because if they've taken much more, then they lost money. If they have been more efficient than what they thought, then they finished things early enough. Now, I don't know if anyone finished any project earlier than what they estimated, because most of us always underestimate. If you get someone to do a project for you, regardless of what kind of project, and they finish the project on time or before time, then you know they overestimated. Okay, they overestimated. Now I'm curious to know from you to tell me how many of you are aware that your projects have something like this. At least for each task, we have the estimated number of hours, the actual number of hours, and the percentage of deviation. If you do, please go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, we got Wayne, Tamara, and Sandy, and Sherry. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's about it. 5 out of 21 people joining me today. By the way, I have over 70 people signed up for this webinar, but it is always the case. If I get 1/3 of the people who signed up, I'd be lucky. Okay, that's about 25%, roughly 25% of people with me today saying they perform this, or their projects do something similar to that. The other 75, you really want to find out. Because if your project manager or your project lead or whoever is leading the project is not doing this, oh my God, I have to say they have no clue about project management. This is minimal practice. This is minimal practice. Now, what I'm hoping that your project would be doing is something like this. And that's also common sense. That's also common sense. What do I have here? I got requirements here. This is requirement number 117, 118, oops, just a typo. This is not the same requirement. My apology. This is supposed to be a different requirement number. I'll fix that chart after. This chart was created in Excel spreadsheet. It was not pulled out from the tool called Romana. The Romana ALM does exactly that, except in order to keep the report on one page, I couldn't pull out a real report that I can fit on one slide. But as you can see, for each one of the requirements, I have each task here, and in this chart here, I assumed I have only 4 tasks: designing, coding by developers, unit testing by developers, and final testing by QA. I'm expecting your process to be a little bit more sophisticated than this. You may have prototyping for some of the features, you may not. You may have high-level design, you may not. You may have database design, you may have user interface design, you may have designing tests, you may have designing test cases. I mean, you can have any number of tests you want. As I said, to simplify things, for each one of those tasks, I'm putting here my estimated number of hours, my actual number of hours. Okay, and if you care about the actual cost in dollars, then all what you have to do is to multiply the number of hours by the hourly rate. I think I assumed certain rate here, and then you multiply this. So obviously in this project we had, and sorry, in this requirement here, number 117, we have overestimated. We have overestimated the design task. That's why it shows here my deviation is below. It is below. It is negative. It is negative when the actual is less than the estimates. Okay, this one here we underestimated. That's why it's 14% more. Okay, and you always compare. You always calculate this based on what you estimated. So it is the actual minus the estimated divided by the estimated. Okay, so this is, it's 6 divided by 44 percentage. It's 14%. All right. This in unit testing here, assuming that your developer is going to do unit testing, they estimated 10 hours, but they took 15 hours, so they had underestimated. They had underestimated by 5 hours, but 5 out of 10. So that's why 5 out of 10, they estimated 10 hours, they took 15 hours, then that's, they underestimated by 50%. So you can look at this number, say if it is a positive number, that means we used more time. If it is a negative number, we used less time. Okay? And then for final testing by QA or whatever, we estimated, please don't look at those numbers as hard numbers, because I just put any numbers there. So I estimated, so the QA person or the tester estimated 15 hours. They took only 12 hours. Of course, anyone look at this says, are you saying the unit testing took more than final testing? I'm not saying that. Those are just numbers for the spreadsheet. But anyway, so here, according to this, final testing took 3 hours less. The initial estimate was 15. We took 3 hours less. If you divide the 3 by the 15, it gives you 20%. But it's 20% negative. Why? Because we have used less time than what we estimated. So now I did this. So here is a total for this feature. So we estimated 104, we used 107. That means that we overestimated by only 3 hours. That's for the whole feature, including all the tasks, and so on. You do the same for the next feature. You do the same here, and then you do the total for the release down here, or the total for the iteration if you are in an agile project, and it gives you the total. So according to this, our total estimates was 807 hours. We used 842 hours, and the cost is, as you can see, we estimate that this number, we use this number. If you take the difference, it tells you that we had underestimated by 4%, just 4%. So that tells you the total iteration or the total project. Even we had overestimated here. Sorry, yeah, we have overestimated by 25% here. We have underestimated by 11% here. We overestimated by 17% here. But the final, we even have underestimated by 25% here. We estimated here for testing to take 120 hours. It took 150 hours. So we underestimated by 25%. But when we balanced everything together, the total project was this, 4%. All right. Now, interestingly enough, when I put that discussion in some of the groups out there in LinkedIn, project management groups in LinkedIn and the CIO groups and similar, I had some very positive reaction. The only groups that rejected that approach is the Agile groups. Let me ask here, how many of you are actually working in Agile projects now, or worked in Agile projects in the past? Right, Tamara, Amy, John, and we have 5 people here. So far, before I even go on with the rest, please communicate with me via the questions panel if this makes sense to you or not. Because the reactions I got from the Agile groups really disturbed me. I got long discussions, especially in the group called Agile at LinkedIn. Yeah, I suggest that you, if you work on an Agile project, go ahead and subscribe to that group, and then look up that discussion. Because I had some sort of resistance from people in that group, and they're saying something that are weird to me, strange, things that are totally against the whole discipline of software engineering and the whole discipline of project management. I had to give up at the end. I couldn't go on and on arguing about nonsense. All right? So, for example, someone said, well, no, you don't understand. We cannot do any of this in Agile. Because in Agile, we don't know upfront how many hours it's going to take to do anything. Oops, really? Of course, I know the Agile framework, and especially the Scrum methodology, talks about something different. It talks about story points and how you estimate each story by story points. I understand all that. At the end, how many hours it is going to take you to finish, to deliver the requirement represented by a user story. And if I am paying you $100 an hour, how do I multiply the number of hours by $100 to calculate the cost? If I am not interested in calculating the cost in dollars, that's okay. But I am certainly interested to know how many hours. Don't tell me user stories. As a customer, as a project manager, as a release manager, I don't know what a user story means. It means something to you in the course of managing the project. It doesn't mean anything to the customer. It doesn't mean anything to the customer. If I'm giving you a user story to implement for me, I don't want you to tell me this is going to take that many user stories, story points. I don't know what that means. I want to know, story points are just a way to estimate the size of the user story. So it's not a measure of effort. It's not a measure of time. It's a measure of size. All right? And of course, Agile teams have a way to know their velocity, which is how many user stories they can finish in a sprint. Okay, this is all good. I am not going to object to that. I want to come to the bottom line here. which is how many hours? How many hours? I only have a comment from Tamara. Let me see, because I want to share this actually here. I hear from Tamara. She says it works with a Scrum very well. So Tamara, I don't know what to say now. Those people who resisted very hard on that Agile group, they don't understand the Scrum. I don't see how this contradicts or conflicts with the Scrum. And Tamara goes further and says, we ask the team to commit to a certain amount of work in a sprint. So I already know upfront how long they estimate for the sprint. I'm going to tell you this, regardless of what Agile you use, if you don't know how many hours it's going to take you to do certain things and how many hours it took you to do these things, and you can come back and determine if you overestimated or underestimated, this is wrong. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means in the whole thing of project management. I can see Wayne agreeing as well. Wayne says, I agree that it works with Agile. Let's find out what John is saying. He says, in our Agile process, which I dislike, okay, John, we're not going to see who you are. They started with very few stories. I'm sorry. They started with very few stories. And they added stories as they were thought of. So at the beginning, they had no clue as the total number of stories and therefore total cost. I agree with I would dislike this process as well. I would. This means that we're just gonna start working and let's find out what we can finish when. All right. So guys, every time I look at a report like this or a spreadsheet like this, I say this is common sense. This is truly, truly common sense. I have another comment here. Someone says, we use Agile ALM software to track estimated and actual story points. Okay, I agree with you. Story points are one thing, but ours is a different thing. Okay, though we don't track this in dollars. I don't care if you track it in dollars or not, but I do care that you track it in hours. Because hours is the unit of measurements of time. If you want to know how much time is going to take you to finish a task, then you need to know how many hours it is, not how many story points. Because the story, one more time, I will repeat that story points are not a measure of time. They're a measure of the complexity and the size of a user story. All right. Thanks to all of you for sharing your feedback here and your comments. So now, please understand, the spreadsheet you see in front of you, okay, because one more time, people are going to say there are some other tasks that are not listed here, like final build, regression testing, and anything else that does not relate to a specific requirement. This spreadsheet is not the complete report. When you see the complete report from Romana ALM, you'll see that there is another portion under that portion that says project level tasks. And for those project level tasks, we have those things, and they are estimated. They are not linked to requirements. We estimate how many hours it's going to take us to do regression testing, how many hours is going to take us to do anything else. How about setting up the test environment? Is setting up the test environment, is it a task that I can link it back to a requirement? Of course not. If I have one person who's going to be spending 10 hours to prepare the test environment for testing, that's a project level task. It would be listed as such and will be added up to the 807 hours so that we can know that here is the total including those project level tasks. All right, let's go further because I still have a lot of work for you, or a lot of ideas, I should say. Here, when we assign work to people, when we ask people to do certain things, do we ever have one person to do the whole thing? Or do we ever have 3 people that will do just everything? No. We better know for this feature or this requirement, who's doing this task. Let's assume this task is prototyping. Then I have a name of a person here, or name of 2 people or 3 people that will perform this task. All right? And of course, when you see the report from Romana ALM, you'll see that it's not only the names of the people, it's how many hours. Let's assume that prototyping for requirement number 1 is going to take 20 hours. And I have 2 people here to do this task. Do I expect each one of them to spend 20 hours? Or do I expect each one of them to spend 10 hours? Or do I have one of them spending 15 hours and the other one is spending only 5 hours? This is the thing. So I can have Joe here spending 15 hours because he's the one who's going to be building all the screen prototypes. And I have Magdi spending only 5 hours because he's the one who's going to just look over those screens and review them before we can prototype them in front of the customer. So that's why not every resource assigned to a task will spend the same number of hours. All right? Now, for the same requirement, who's going to do the actual code? That's a task 2, for example. I have to put the name of the person here and how many hours. If I have estimated 25 hours for this task, for this requirement, and there's only one person who's doing it, then that person is spending the 25 hours. Who's doing the testing for that feature? Assuming that task 3 is testing. If my testing is split to 2 subtasks, one of them is designing the tests and the other one is executing the tests, then I have 2 people, assuming that I have 2 different people to do it. So you have the flexibility there, and so on, and you do the same for each requirement, and at the end, oh no, you don't add up anything here. You don't have totals here because there's nothing. The data in the spreadsheet is names of people. But here's what I heard from the Agile groups. Another person saw something like this, and guess what they said, which irritated me. He says, in Agile projects, we do not know who's doing what. Imagine, we don't know who's doing what. If that's what Agile is, I don't care for it. If I have a project, and of course, trust me, you would read that discussion from those people that claim and they appear like they know everything. I think I remember one of them said, Magdi, you don't understand. So, okay, help me understand. He says, it's a self-managed team. We put the user stories in front of the team and they take it and they do it. We don't know who's doing what. We don't assign user stories up front to people. We don't assign tasks up front to people. Everyone picks up whatever they can do and they do. Oh my God. That would not even work in the simplest project when you get someone to do some work in your backyard. Imagine if you have someone, if you need someone to do some beautification to your backyard, to put a fountain and put some shrubs and maybe putting a pool, and the contractor comes with 10 guys and they stand there and say, okay guys, here's what we need to do. So please go ahead, pitch in, do whatever you can. If anyone can do anything, go ahead and do it. Oh my God. Is this how we're going to do our software engineering? Is this how we're going to manage our projects? I think this is the point at which I gave up. When someone started to talk like that, I said something to the effect like, I'm sorry, I don't want to be part of that discussion. In a way, I do not want to waste my time. That person, if I remember, was not too sporty. You know what he did? He went and reported my discussion on my posting to be spam to the group. And because of him, I was suspended for 2 weeks. Here's what people do. They just don't like, they take things personal. And I said, no, I'm not going to be part of that discussion. Okay, if that's the agile you practice, I'm not going to be part of that. I don't want to even talk about it. Because I'm not going to hear it that someone's saying, we don't assign anything to anyone. Let me see, I have some questions here or comments from people. I'd like to share it with people here. Jack, no, the audio is not off. I'm going to answer Jack here. I hope you're hearing me fine now. Everyone is hearing me, right? I'm assuming everyone is hearing me because no one else complained. All right, I'm sorry, I'm just responding to Jack here. All right, so that was not really it. Thank you, Anand. Okay, let me see if there's other. Anand has a question here. We are following this specific work assignment where requirement 1 is user story 1 and so on. Thank you, Anand, for sharing that with us. Okay, nothing else to share. Good. So please, go ahead and join LinkedIn group, and I think the group name, if I remember, called Agile, and you search for that discussion there. Sorry, based on those keywords, and you'll see. So I need to know who's doing what. Who's doing what? That's all what I'm. This is the basics of project management. If we're not going to do this, then we are following a nonsense approach to project management. Here's the interesting thing. Here's my timeline. If I have different people performing different tasks for different requirements over a certain period of time, then when I speak about the timeline, it doesn't make any sense at all to use a timeline in a tool like Microsoft Project. Because the tool Microsoft Project does not allow you to put the features. This screen you're looking at now is actually taken from the Romana ALM. This is the timeline in ALM. This is the timeline in Romana ALM, the tool. And as you can see, I just cut a segment of the report and put it here in front of you. On the left here, I have all my requirements or my features or my user stories. Now here I have the dates. And now I have the tasks. I have the tasks. I have prototyping here for this requirement, which will start on this date and will end on this date. And then, can't remember what this task is. Yeah, we're going to have a meeting. It's very interesting. Performing the prototyping itself is one task. The prototyping meeting, which happens in many agile projects, which you call it, show and tell meeting, whatever you call it, it's the meeting where we're going to meet with the customer to show them the prototype. It's going to happen on July 17. And it is for the same feature. Of course, I may have another meeting down here for this feature, and I may have another meeting down here for this feature. All right? But this is showing the tasks and their duration. Interestingly enough, when you actually look at the tool in Romana ALM, once you put the cursor on a task, it shows you immediately who's performing the task and how many hours we have estimated or they have estimated to spend for this task and how many actual hours. All this comes in one. Of course, because I cut and paste, this is a static picture, you can't see that. But of course, you notice right away there is a test design here. There is a test design here. There is coding here. There is coding here. And this is what you see here is a task number in the tool. This is task number 12. Maybe for simplicity, we should not be displaying the task number because it doesn't help anyway. Okay? This task number 12, the same one. There is no difference between this task and this task. This task says this is coding. And in the description of the task, it says it's writing the code with every, so we give a general description of the task. But this tells you that writing the code for this feature is going to take from June 19 to June 21st. Writing the code for this feature is going to take from June 15 to June 17. The reason this is happening because for this task, we had decided to do some prototyping first. Then we're going to do the coding. Okay? We have tested design here. We have tested design here. Okay, for this task. Someone says, how come you're starting tested design before you wrote the code for this task? Well, our methodology says that. Once we have the task, once we have asked all the questions, we start going into our scenarios, and writing the scenarios and writing the test cases is test design task. Okay, so that is the timeline. I will show you this report exactly in the Romana ALM, but you'll see much more than what you're looking at here. You can click on the requirement here. You can see the details of requirement. Because if someone says, "Why is it taking so much time to write code for this feature?" Guess what? You can click on this and you can see the feature. But this is a timeline. I am curious, really, really curious, to know how many of you. Let me clear the hands here. How many of you say yes? Our project, agile or not, it doesn't matter. Our project does a timeline like that. And if you do say that, then I would love to know what tool you're using. Tamara, thank you. Share with me, please, what tool you're using to do this. Anyone else? Only one person so far. All what I'm asking here is that how many of you would say our project is keeping a track of the tasks, the task duration for every feature or user story or requirement? And I want the rest of you to tell me if that's common sense or not. Anyone here is willing to say, Magdi, you're asking too much. That's too much to do. I don't know how else I can manage my projects without doing this. Okay, let's find out what Tamara said. Okay, because I know there is no tool that does this except Romana ALM. Tamara says we use Excel. And absolutely, Tamara, thank you, because years and years ago, when I managed projects and Romana ALM was not there, I had to use, actually I used Lotus 1-3 in the older days. Lotus 1-3, probably some of you were not born yet. Then I started to use Excel. Then I started to architect Romana ALM. Okay, I architected Romana ALM to implement all the practices that I've been teaching people over the years that I found no tool does. Guess what? Guess why no tool does? Not only this practice, but many other things. Because people don't do it through software engineering. Thank you, Tamara. And my apology, I used Tamara, I pronounce your name as Tamara because that's an Egyptian name, or this is the Egyptian way of pronouncing your name. You might be pronouncing it as Tamara, which is fine, but I couldn't get myself to call it Tamara. It's Tamara is an Egyptian name. Oh, thank you. All right. I'd love to hear some reaction from others with respect to this practice, if this makes sense or not. Because if it doesn't, to you, I want to know that. So Sherry says we use Redmine for project management. but I appreciate that. But does it do this? I'm curious to know, because I learn every day. I'm curious to know, does Redmine do something similar to this practice? Does Redmine or any other project management tool you know of? Because as you can see, I proudly said the only tool I know of that does this is Romana ALM. But I'm willing to learn if anyone reports to me that you're using another tool that does something similar, which is simply keeping a track of the tasks, the duration of the task, who's assigned to each task, and relate this to each requirement. Does Redmine do that? If just let me know. Okay, I'm just reading. Okay, Miranda says we use a task-oriented tracking system. The main project creates sub-requests. Okay, I'm aware of all that, to put in the actual hours to complete each sub-request. Okay, it is not as user-friendly as this. Well, thank you. But again, you stated that it was a, what you call it, task-oriented or task-based. And that's what I've been trying to teach project managers around the globe, that task-based or task-oriented project management is not really the way to go. Wow, is that right? Am I using my time that quick? I have 8 minutes left. I better speed up. I have not even showed you the tool. But you've seen some reports in the tool. Okay. All right. Let's go further here. This is another one. This is another one. Now, if we're not doing anything at all from what I talked about, I think we must be doing this. We better be doing this. And this is simply saying tracing requirements to test cases, or tracing test cases back to requirements. These are the tests from QA perspective. For each requirement you have, or for each user story, for each feature, you want to know how many test cases do you have. This is very simple, guys. Very simple. If I don't have that number, then guess what? I don't know what I'm doing. Leave those two columns for now, because those two columns are specific to Romana LM. It says pre-designed versus exploratory. So out of the 87 test cases, 65 of them were pre-designed, and 22 of them were done on the fly using exploratory testing. This is a different thing that I teach people, that sometimes we're going to design tests and sometimes we're not going to have time to design, so we're going to just do exploratory testing. Also, positive and negative testing, I ask people to think about how many positive testing versus how many negative testing, and Romana does that. But so if you leave out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, I'm sorry, 4 columns, the pre-designed, exploratory, positive, and negative. Leave out those 4 columns because they are additional practice. They are still very useful, but total number of test cases here, how many of them passed, how many of them failed, and how many not executed yet. So these should add up to 87. And now here is what's important. 2 columns here. Percentage of readiness. That's simply saying how ready this feature is for release. If I have 87 test cases and only 55 of the 87 passed, so excuse me, I calculate readiness by dividing the 55 by the 87, and that gives me 63%. As far as completing or completeness or completion, I take everything that I executed, pass and fail, the 55 plus the 3, that's 58. 58. And divide the total 58 by the 87. That gives me a slightly higher number. If you look at this feature, I have 35 test cases left. I have executed all of them except one. So because 30 passed, 4 failed, total 34. That's why you see the completion is high. It's 97%, but the readiness is low. The readiness is going to be always either less or equal to completion. It's going to be equal to completion if all the test cases you have executed passed. If you have some failures, the failures are not used here. They're used here. So again, the completion says how much work have we done from what we're supposed to do. The readiness says how ready this feature is. And you do this for every feature, and you add up over the release or over the iteration. So in total, I have that many number of test cases. How many passed? How many failed? How many yet to be executed? And here is my readiness for the whole release. Here is my completion. So this whole release or this whole iteration is only 71% ready. Only 71% ready. If you're asked in a status meeting, it says we're that far. This is the progress. If someone says, how come? You say, because we have some features here which are very low in readiness. 47% ready for feature 724. And of course, you must have reasons for that. We have some 52s. So you still have some features under 50%. And maybe those features or those user stories were introduced at the very last minute. Okay? Again, let me ask my curious question as always. How many of you would say, yes, 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 we do this? For each requirement, we know how many test cases we have, we know how many of them executed, how many of them passed, and we calculate the completion and the readiness. I don't see any hands yet. Please raise your hand. Okay, got few. One. I got only two. Only 2 out of 23. That's like 10%. So share with me through the questions any comment you want to tell me, because I'm a bit disturbed here. If we don't know for each requirement, if we don't know how many test cases we have, how many passed, how many failed, how many yet to be executed, I don't know how I'm gonna give some status reports. All right, let's go further. This is my last one, which of interest to developers and the project managers. Okay, this is simply for each requirement. I know which code components have been written to implement that requirement. I can tell you now, I have not seen one single project that does this. I've been teaching this stuff to people since the mid 90s, late 80s to the mid 90s, when I was teaching at the University of St. Thomas in the Masters of Software Engineering. I had professionals coming to do Masters in Software Engineering. And I taught them this. Said, if you're going to write code, if your people are going to write code, you better know for each feature or for each user story or for each requirement, where is the code? What code did we write? What code did we write? If you look at any piece of code, like this component here, you want to know which requirements or which user stories this code implements. Why? Why do I need to do this? Because if anyone goes to that component and make any changes to it, guess what? For the purpose of regression testing, we need to know that. Because if I tell you that I made major changes to the component number 4, whatever that is, then from your perspective, from QA perspective, for testing purposes, for regression testing, you say, then I need to test this requirement number 1, requirement number 3, requirement number 7, requirement number 10, and requirement number 13. And you should never trust that those features are going to work anymore the way they worked before. Why? Because I changed the code that's underlying those requirements. So how would you trust me? Of course, as a developer, I might come and say, don't worry about it. I did not break anything else, but you know better than that. You can't trust me on that one, right? My God, I used up all my time. So very quick here. Here's Romana ALM. And as you can see, I didn't have time to even open the tool. I was hoping to show you the tool. But Romana ALM is a tool, is a fully integrated ALM management tool. It is available for free, by the way. You can use it for free for up to 5 users. If you go to romanasoftware.com, romanasoftware.com, remember it's double M. And Romana, by the way, is an Egyptian word for a pomegranate, the thing you see in the middle here. So you go to romanasoftware.com, you request access to Romana in the cloud, and you can put up to 5 people, and our support team will send you access to use it for as long as you need it, for as many projects as you need it. No limitation on time, no limitation on the number of projects, no limitation on the number of features or number of user stories or number of test cases or anything. Use it. We want people to use it. And all these features, all these things I talked about, and of course much more, are supported there. Romana, as you can see, it does everything that you would ever imagine to do with requirements and user stories. It does everything you'd ever imagine to do with test cases and test scripts and test sets and everything and scenarios right here. It performs all the kind of things we talked about in project management right here. So Romana does the feature-based project management methodology that I just explained. It has use case component as well. It does everything you can imagine to do in bug tracking or issue management. It does everything with the change management and does many other things that are not even in that chart. As you can see, Romana also integrates with Jira and the QTP and Subversion for code control. Because if I'm going to look at a given requirement and say what code components are written, so it links to SVN to pull out the code from there. Right now, it only integrates with SVN. We're working on integrating it with Team Foundation Server if you're putting your code there. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully, this was worth your time to be with me. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And hopefully, we'll see you in a few in future webinars. Please go to the conference website. I just want to tell you about the conference that's happening in San Diego. If you'd love to enjoy, oops. Oh, I make the mistake all the time. Quality Management Conference.com. This conference is going to be happening in San Diego the week of September 29 through October 3rd. It's a great, if you look at the program here, we have 5 days. We have a lot of courses that count towards certifications. And many of them have those ideas because I teach a number of them here. I teach a course here, I believe, on best practices in software quality assurance and quality control. I have another one here on requirement management, and I think in this tutorial here on requirement management, I talk about this approach of feature-based. But anyway, you're not going to come to the conference just to listen to me. You're going to come to listen to all these wonderful people. On Wednesday here, we have a large number of presentations here by different people. So thank you so much again one more time, and hope to see you either in San Diego or in one of the future webinars.